picture this. You're just sitting on your couch.
Right, totally normal day.
Yeah, reading a book, maybe sipping some coffee. You feel completely fine, but suddenly your wrist buzzes. You look down and your Apple Watch it's flashing an alert. It just detected a 30-second irregular heartbeat.
Which is terrifying for a lot of people.
Right. Your heart rhythm, according to this tiny computer anyway, is abnormal. But you don't feel dizzy, your chest doesn't hurt, you feel absolutely normal. So here's the million-dollar question. Do you have a disease, or did you just generate a weird data point?
And that is, it's really the defining medical dilemma of our wearable technology era. To answer it, we have to realize that what we consider a normal heartbeat is a surprisingly fragile illusion. It requires this perfect microscopic cascade of electrical events to happen roughly, 100,000 times a day without fail.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today's mission for this deep dive is to look way past the simple idea of a heart beating fast or slow. We really want to unpack the actual pathophysiology of arrhythmias.
Yeah, what happens when the rhythm actually goes wrong?
Exactly. We're exploring the precise electrical failures that cause those rhythms to go haywire. We have this fascinating stack of research and historical notes to guide us through, the exact ion channels, the anatomical roadblocks, and all the medical mysteries that define how our hearts keep time. But where do we even start with defining a broken rhythm?
Well, we first have to accept that normal is highly relative.
How so?
Well, if we define an arrhythmia as just a deviation from the normal, orderly sequence of the heart's electrical activation, we immediately run into a contextual problem. Take a resting heart rate of 45 beats per minute.
Which sounds low.
Right, and if you see that in a sedentary 70-year-old, that is a dangerous bradyarrhythmia. The heart is beating too slowly to properly perfuse the brain, and it's a medical emergency.
But what if it's not a 70-year-old?
Exactly. If you observe that exact same heart rate of 45 on a Tuesday morning in, say, an Olympic endurance athlete, it's completely unremarkable.
Totally normal.
Yeah, context is everything.
And it goes beyond just the resting rate, too, because the research points out that a single early beat, a premature ventricular contraction, is technically an arrhythmia by the strictest definition.
Yes, technically speaking.
Yet if you place a continuous Holter monitor on, the vast majority of healthy adults and just track them for a week, you will capture those skipped or extra beats.
Almost everybody has them.
Right. They produce zero symptoms and carry zero measurable risk for most people. So it's like a check engine light that flashes when you hit a pothole, but the car itself is completely fine. Are you fundamentally broken right down to the engine, or just driving on a bumpy road?
That's a great analogy. And the fact that we can even ask that question is largely due to the realization that the heart is an electrical machine, which, wasn't always obvious to early doctors.
Yeah, the notes highlight this wild experiment from 1856 by two German physiologists, Rudolf von Kulliker and Heinrich Müller. They took a beating frog heart and placed a separate frog's sciatic nerve, which was still attached to a calf muscle, directly across it.
Right, and every time the isolated frog heart beat, the separate calf muscle twitched.
That is just crazy to picture.
It is. But that simple visual proved the heart isn't merely a mechanical pump pushing fluid around. It actively generates its own electrical current.
It's literally an electrical organ.
Exactly. And that current is strong enough to stimulate outside tissue.
Wow. But feeling a pulse or watching a frog muscle twitch still leaves you flying somewhat blind diagnostically. How did doctors historically figure out what the actual squiggles on the paper meant? Because the transition from feeling a pulse to actually mapping the electricity happened in 1901, right?
Right, when Dutch physiologist Willem Einthoven built the string galvanometer.
Which won a Nobel Prize, by the way.
It did, and for good reason. Einthoven's invention was essentially the first electrocardiogram, or ECG.
Okay, so how did it actually work?
Well, by suspending a silvered quartz string in a magnetic field, the microscopic electrical currents generated by the human heart would cause the string to move.
Just from the electricity of the heartbeat.
Yeah. He captured these movements on photographic paper, giving us the visual waveforms we still use today. The P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave.
So he gave physicians the ability to literally see an arrhythmia.
Exactly. A doctor could look at a strip of paper and identify the irregular pattern of atrial fibrillation simply by noting the absence of the normal P waves.
But seeing the pattern on paper doesn't explain the underlying mechanism. Like, by the 1920s, scientists like Sir Thomas Lewis realized they needed to zoom in much further, right? Down to the cellular level to figure out where that electricity was actually coming from.
Yeah, to understand the origin, we have to look at the atomic unit of the heartbeat, which is the cardiac action potential.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. Every single heart muscle cell maintains a voltage difference across its outer membrane. It does this using ion channels, which are these microscopic protein gates that open and close to let sodium, potassium, and calcium ions flow in and out of the cell in this highly choreographed sequence.
Like a very specific dance.
Exactly. When sodium rushes in, the cell depolarizes. That means it fires its electrical signal. Then when potassium flows out, it repolarizes, resetting itself for the next beat.
And this action potential has 5 distinct phases, right? But the sources say phase 2 is particularly unique to the heart. It's this long, calcium-driven plateau.
That plateau is the critical difference between a nerve cell and a cardiac cell. In a nerve cell, an electrical impulse is a tiny, incredibly fast spike.
Just a quick zap.
Right. But in a cardiac cell, phase 2 keeps the electrical charge active for hundreds of milliseconds.
Which is an eternity in cellular time.
It really is.
Yeah.
That prolonged influx of calcium is what makes the actual physical contraction of the heart muscle last long enough to fully squeeze the blood out of the chamber before the cell resets.
Okay, so at the microscopic level, every single arrhythmia traces back to one of these ion channels doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. But of course, these cells don't just fire randomly. They follow a strict anatomical chain of command. Normal sinus rhythm begins in the sinoatrial node, or SA node, which is a tiny cluster of specialized pacemaker cells sitting high up in the right atrium.
Yeah, and the SA node dictates the pace, usually 60 to 100 beats a minute. This is due to a unique characteristic in its resting phase, known as phase 4.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting.
It does. Unlike normal muscle cells that wait for a signal to fire, the membrane of the SA node is inherently leaky to sodium and calcium ions.
Wait, our primary pacemaker is leaky?
It is. It never truly rests. The voltage constantly drifts upward until it hits a threshold and fires on its own.
That sounds like a manufacturing defect, not a feature. I mean, if you are building a precision timing device to keep a human alive, why on earth would you want the main timer to be inherently unstable?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know. But that instability is the exact mechanism of something called automaticity. Think about it. If the SA node required an external command from the brain to fire,
Oh, I see where this is going.
right? A severed nerve or a momentary loss of central nervous system function could stop your heart instantly.
Which would be bad.
Very bad. Because the membrane leaks, it automatically reaches the threshold to fire all by itself, completely independent of the brain. It is the ultimate failsafe.
Okay, that makes sense. So the SA node fires, and the electrical signal spreads out through the upper chambers, the atria, causing them to contract.
Right.
Then the signal funnels down to the only electrical bridge between the top and bottom of the heart, which is the atrioventricular node, or AV node. And the sources highlight that the AV node deliberately slows the electrical signal down by about 1/10 of a second.
Yes, which is another stroke of genius in the design.
Yeah.
If the signal raced straight through without that 1/10 of a second delay, the top chambers and the bottom chambers of the heart would contract almost simultaneously.
They'd just be fighting against each other.
Exactly. The delay at the AV node gives the atria just enough time to finish emptying their load of blood into the ventricles below.
And then once that blood is fully loaded, the signal exits the AV node and hits a high-speed electrical highway called the His-Purkinje system. Right. This network distributes the signal so rapidly that the entire massive bottom section of the heart, the ventricles, can contract in one powerful coordinated squeeze instead of like a disorganized ripple. And understanding that normal chain of command, so the SA node, AV node, His-Purkinje system, provides the framework for understanding how it actually breaks.
Which is what we're here for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When we look at the pathophysiology of arrhythmias, the malfunctions generally fall into 3 distinct buckets. The first is abnormal impulse formation.
Meaning a piece of heart tissue that shouldn't be generating a beat just starts firing on its own, essentially usurping the SA node.
Exactly. The sources describe ectopic automaticity, where a random group of cells down in the ventricles might start depolarizing faster than the primary pacemaker, hijacking the entire rhythm.
We also see something called triggered activity within this first bucket. This is where an extra abnormal electrical spark piggybacks on the tail end of a normal beat. The most illustrative example of this is a condition called Torsades de Pointe.
Which is a chaotic, twisting ventricular tachycardia, right?
Yes, and it's directly tied to what we see on an ECG as a long QT interval.
Okay, let's unpack that. The QT interval represents the total time it takes for the ventricles to depolarize or fire and then fully repolarize or reset.
Right, and if that reset phase takes too long, the heart is incredibly vulnerable.
Why is that?
Well, that vulnerability often comes down to a specific potassium channel called the HERG channel. That channel is responsible for pushing potassium out of the cell to achieve that reset. But many common drugs, like certain antihistamines, antipsychotics, and antibiotics, can inadvertently block the HERG channel.
So the drug blocks the reset.
Exactly. When the channel is blocked, repolarization is delayed, stretching out that QT interval. The cell gets confused, and calcium channels can mistakenly reopen before the reset is finished.
Triggering a new premature beat that sends the heart into a dangerous spiral.
Exactly right.
So that covers bucket 1, impulses forming improperly. But what if the SA node fires perfectly on time, the channels do their job, but the signal simply doesn't reach its destination?
That brings us to the second bucket of malfunction: abnormal impulse conduction. The most common manifestation of this is a heart block. Over time, scarring, fibrosis, or calcification can build up in the AV node or the His-Purkinje system.
So the signal is generated perfectly by the SA node, but it just hits a physical roadblock. It slows down or drops out completely.
Right.
Like in a third-degree or complete heart block, the electrical communication between the top and bottom of the heart is totally severed.
Yes, completely divorced.
The atria continue to beat at the SA node's pace, say 70 beats per minute, but the ventricles receive no signal.
Not at all.
They only survive because a desperate backup pacemaker in the His-Purkinje system kicks in, but its natural leaky phase is much slower, maybe 30 beats per minute. So the top and the bottom of the heart are just doing their own thing, each following its own separate timer.
It's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
But while a drop signal is bad, the most rapid and deadly arrhythmias don't actually come from a block signal or a rogue pacemaker cell. They come from a signal that gets trapped in an infinite loop.
Okay, this is the third bucket, and honestly the most counterintuitive one: reentry.
Yes, reentry. It's fascinating because it requires a very specific setup. You need a single electrical pathway that splits into two separate routes around an obstacle.
Okay, a split pathway.
And one of those routes has to conduct the signal much more slowly than the other, and it has to have a faster recovery time.
Right, so when a premature beat enters this split pathway, it might find the fast route temporarily blocked because that tissue hasn't reset yet. So the signal travels down the slow route.
Exactly. And by the time it slowly creeps past the obstacle, the fast route has finally recovered. So the signal then enters the fast route from the bottom, traveling backward up to where it started.
Only to find the slow route ready to accept the signal again.
Yes.
It is exactly like a traffic circle where one lane is closed for construction. The cars get backed up in the single open lane, which is our slow conduction. By the time the cars slowly make it all the way around the circle, the entrance they started at is completely clear of traffic again.
Right, they have nowhere else to go.
Exactly. Instead of taking the exit and leaving the circle, they just keep driving in a loop over and over, faster and faster.
And that electrical traffic circle spins completely independently of the SA node's normal timer, creating this self-sustaining storm. This is the exact mechanism behind atrial flutter, where a reentrant circuit loops around the right atrium at a strikingly consistent 300 beats per minute.
The 300 beats per minute.
It's incredibly fast. The AV node, thankfully, blocks most of those signals from reaching the ventricles, or the patient would die instantly.
We see this same loop mechanism in Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, right? But the anatomy is a little different.
Yes, WPW. Patients with WPW are actually born with an extra abnormal strand of conducting tissue called the bundle of Kent.
It acts as an anatomical shortcut, a bypass tract that bridges the atria and the ventricles entirely outside the AV node.
Right, because the signal can travel down the normal AV node and then race back up through the bundle of Kent, or vice versa. The patient is born with a permanent physical racetrack.
It provides the exact two pathways required for a massive reentrant loop to take hold, causing episodes where the heart races at terrifying speeds. And, here's where it gets really interesting. Discussing the bundle of Kent highlights a crucial point from the source material.
What's that?
Arrhythmias are frequently misunderstood as purely electrical problems, totally divorced from the physical plumbing of the heart.
Oh, yes. That's a major misconception.
In reality, structural heart disease is often what lays the groundwork for these electrical failures, right?
Absolutely. The electrical traffic circle needs an obstacle, a physical roadblock to split the pathway. A perfectly healthy heart muscle conducts electricity uniformly. But if a patient suffers a heart attack, part of the muscle dies and
Yeah.
turns into scar tissue.
And scar tissue doesn't conduct electricity.
No, it doesn't. It forces the electrical signal to weave and split around it, creating those microscopic zones of slow conduction we talked about.
Even high blood pressure can do this, right? It can stretch the atrial walls, causing microscopic fibrosis that accomplishes the same thing.
Exactly. And when we talk about anatomical triggers, atrial fibrillation, or AFib, is the most prominent example. For decades, the prevailing theory, proposed by Gordon Moe in the 1960s, was that AFib was just random, chaotic electrical wavelets wandering aimlessly through the heart.
Just pure chaos.
Right. But in 1998, French electrophysiologist Michel Heisiger made a landmark discovery that completely shifted our understanding.
What did he find?
He mapped the inside of the heart during AFib and found that in a huge percentage of patients, the chaotic rhythm wasn't actually starting in the heart chamber itself. It was being triggered by rapid ectopic firing from tiny sleeves of muscle tissue located just inside the pulmonary veins.
The pulmonary veins, the vessels that bring oxygenated blood from the lungs back to the left atrium.
Yes.
Discovering that the most common arrhythmia originates in blood vessels completely outside the main chamber, that fundamentally altered the treatment landscape.
It did. It directly led to the development of pulmonary vein isolation, which is a specific type of catheter ablation. Electrophysiologists go in and physically burn or freeze a ring of tissue around the opening of those veins.
By destroying that tissue, they build an electrical firewall. So the erratic signals from the veins might still fire, but they can no longer cross the firewall to fibrillate the rest of the atrium.
Exactly. It isolates the problem.
But if we know exactly where it starts and we have this ablation technique to build a firewall, why is AFib still such a massive, growing global health problem? It affects tens of millions of people.
Because isolating the trigger doesn't always cure the underlying structural disease of the atrium that allows the fibrillation to sustain itself in the first place.
Ah, right.
If the atrial tissue is heavily stretched and fibrosed from years of sleep apnea or hypertension, an ablation might stop one trigger, but the tissue is still primed to sustain a reentrant rhythm from another source.
The tension between trying to fix the electrical signal and treating the underlying physical disease leads us to what the research calls the perfect monitor trap.
Yes, a very dangerous trap.
If we map out the ion channels, the sodium-potassium pumps, and the anatomy, it feels like we should just be able to prescribe a targeted pill to fix the electricity. But the history of antiarrhythmic drugs is, well, it's incredibly fraught.
It really is. Let's look at digoxin, for example. It's derived from the foxglove plant and has been used in cardiology since 1785. From first principles, we know exactly how it works.
Okay, how does it work?
It inhibits the sodium-potassium pump on the cell membrane. This causes sodium to build up inside the cell, which in turn slows down the cellular exchanger that removes calcium. The resulting increase in intracellular calcium makes the heart contract with more force.
But the therapeutic window for digoxin is incredibly narrow. If the dose is even slightly too high, that calcium overload becomes toxic.
Very toxic.
The cell gets so stuffed with calcium that it starts spontaneously releasing it during its resting phase. This creates delayed after depolarizations, triggering a dangerous oscillating ventricular arrhythmia. Basically, a simple calcium traffic jam leads directly to a life-threatening rhythm.
It is a clean, direct link from a drug's mechanism to a rhythm disturbance. But the medical community had to learn a much harder, more devastating lesson about antiarrhythmic drugs during the 1980s.
You were referring to the CANTARIS trial, right? The cardiac arrhythmia suppression trial, published in 1989.
Yes, the CANTEST trial. At the time, doctors knew that patients who had survived a heart attack and exhibited frequent premature ventricular contractions, or PVCs, had a significantly higher risk of sudden cardiac death.
And the logical assumption, based on everything known about cellular electrophysiology at the time, was totally straightforward. Just give these patients a drug to suppress the extra beats.
Exactly. Clean up the ECG monitor and you will save their lives. That was the thought process. So they used class IC antiarrhythmic drugs like flecainide, which powerfully block sodium channels to slow down electrical conduction.
And the crazy thing is the drugs did exactly what they were designed to do. The monitors looked beautiful. The PVCs vanished.
They did. But the trial had to be stopped prematurely by the Safety Monitoring Board.
It is absolutely terrifying. The patients taking those perfectly logical PVC-suppressing drugs were dying of sudden cardiac arrest at roughly 2.5 times the rate of the patients taking a placebo.
Yes. It was a shock to the entire cardiology community.
We were essentially curing the squiggly lines on a piece of paper, congratulating ourselves on the math, while actively harming the human being attached to the machine.
That's exactly what happened. If you slow down electrical conduction with a class IC drug in a healthy heart, it suppresses extra beats.
Ew.
But these patients weren't healthy. They had prior heart attacks.
They had scar tissue.
Yes. By deliberately slowing down the electrical conduction across the entire heart, the drugs inadvertently created the exact slow conduction zones required for lethal reentrant loops to take hold around those scars. The drugs promoted the exact ventricular fibrillation they were supposed to prevent.
It is the ultimate cautionary tale in modern medicine. A surrogate marker, a pristine rhythm strip, is not the same as clinical survival.
No, it's not. And it also revealed that our attempts to neatly categorize these drugs are fundamentally flawed.
Like the Vaughan Williams classification system.
Right, which is still taught in medical schools today. It categorizes antiarrhythmic drugs purely by which single ion channel they block: sodium, potassium, calcium, or beta receptors.
But the real world of pathophysiology is much messier than that. A highly effective drug like amiodarone, for example, blocks all four of those channels simultaneously.
Exactly. The Kasich trial taught us that manipulating the intricate ballet of ion channels is inherently dangerous. Yeah. And despite everything we've learned since 1989, there is still intense ongoing debate about how arrhythmias actually sustain themselves in human tissue.
We see this with the ongoing fight over AFib. Once it progresses from occasional episodes to a persistent, continuous state, the mechanism seems to actually change.
It does. Some researchers still back the multiple wavelet hypothesis, arguing it devolves into pure, chaotic electrical noise.
Right, just total chaos.
Conversely, researchers like Sanjeev Narayan and Jose Jalif champion the rotor hypothesis. They argue that persistent AFib isn't chaos at all, but rather is driven by a small number of highly stable, high-frequency rotating spiral waves, or rotors, that spin like tiny hurricanes and fibrillate the rest of the tissue.
And electrophysiologists actually developed mapping systems, like FIRM, specifically to locate and ablate the core of these rotors.
They did, but the follow-up clinical trials have yielded mixed results. It shows that we still do not have a unified, agreed-upon model for the most common rhythm disorder on the planet.
Which loops us right back to the dilemma we opened with.
The smartwatch.
The smartwatch on your wrist. Because arrhythmias like AFib can be entirely asymptomatic, consumer technology equipped with single-lead ECGs is now detecting incidental abnormal rhythms in millions of otherwise healthy people. Are we creating a whole new generation of sick people who actually feel perfectly fine just because we suddenly have much better magnifying glasses?
It's a profound clinical question. If an algorithm detects 30 asymptomatic seconds of atrial fibrillation in a 40-year-old, we suddenly have to weigh the statistical abnormality against the pathological danger.
Do we put that healthy person on strong, lifelong blood thinners to prevent a theoretical stroke, risking a severe brain bleed?
Right. Or do we perform an invasive catheter ablation for a rhythm they can't even feel? We are drowning in high-resolution data, but data isn't the same as wisdom.
It really isn't. So today, we've traced the timeline from frog legs twitching on a laboratory table in the 1800s right up to the intricate millisecond by millisecond ballet of sodium, potassium, and calcium ion channels.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We examined the structural roadblocks, the scars and fibrosis that turn a fast heartbeat into a deadly, infinite loop. And we faced the devastating historical lessons of the Kazes trial, where treating the monitor literally killed the patient. The mechanics of how the heart keeps time and how it fails are incredibly delicate. We are talking about microscopic protein gates and tenth of a second delays keeping us alive.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, consider the profound irony that emerges from all these sources. We just spent a significant amount of time detailing the exact milliseconds of a calcium plateau, the subtle repolarization delays of the QT interval, and the catastrophic danger of trying to tweak those tiny channels with precise drugs.
Right, the KSD trial proved exactly how easily that microscopic precision can backfire. The margin for error is razor thin.
It is. Yet when we confront sudden cardiac arrest, which claims hundreds of thousands of lives annually, predominantly through ventricular fibrillation, which is the most chaotic and lethal reentrant arrhythmia of all,
the absolute worst-case scenario,
the most effective life-saving cure for it isn't a precise microscopic drug at all.
it is the exact opposite of precise.
It is a massive, blunt force shock of external electricity from a public access defibrillator.
Just boom.
Boom. To fix the most complex, subtle cellular glitch in the entire human body, our absolute best solution is to literally unplug the machine and plug it back in with thousands of volts.
Depolarizing every single cell simultaneously to force a total reset of the SA node.
Exactly. The tension between the microscopic precision of human biology and the brute force realities of saving a life is honestly simply astonishing. It's definitely something to ponder the next time you happen to feel your pulse.